WealthWise Live, Money Talks. Master your money, secure your future.
All right. So, welcome everybody. This is the first episode of WealthWise Live. I'm Malachi Battle, and today's topic is overcoming financial disadvantages and why personal finance is personal. And I'm incredibly honored to have our first guest, Ms. Keisha Bickham. Ms. Bickham is a two-time first-generation college graduate, a former C-suite executive, and now CEO of her own company, Williroc Ventures LLC. And first off, I just like to ask you how you're doing today.
I'm doing great.
Yeah.
Doing great.
Yes, ma'am. And I know I gave a little bit of an introduction for you, but if you would like to, formally introduce yourself, have at it as well.
Oh, you did great. I mean, I look forward to joining in this conversation. Money is something I'll talk to any and everybody about, including strangers who may wonder who is this person on the street talking. But came from a very humble background, excited, and wanted to figure out what being a professional, having a good job was, and I went down that path as you mentioned in my career, and then did some smart things and with some lucky things to be able to get myself in a position to be financially free and as a family. And so I look forward to sharing with that and the path and the journey to get there. So excited about this conversation.
Yes, ma'am. Me too. So that's kind of like the perfect segue into the first portion of our topic, which is overcoming financial disadvantages. And so my first question is, have you ever felt disadvantaged when it came to finances? And if so, when did you realize that and how did it impact your mindset at the time?
So it's interesting. Like I probably didn't realize that I was quote unquote financially disadvantaged. I don't know if I ever realized it really until I got into the corporate setting. So even though I grew up in a single parent household, my father was in my life. I had a supportive network with my grandparents and cousins and so forth. I'm an only child, and it never really felt like I didn't have what I needed. And so always had what I needed. Wasn't in a like a financial vulnerability type situation. And it probably wasn't until I started filling out college applications and so forth that I realized, because I said, Mama, just give me your tax forms. Let me fill out the form, sign here. I took that ownership as a first generation going to college, and I didn't know what a normal salary was. I didn't know what was low or high, but I did know that to be able to pay for college, I was going to have to find the money. Like it wasn't sitting in the house. And so
Right.
that's probably the first time.
Mhm.
And so I took that initiative in saying, I want to pay my way to college. And I used to think it was this noble thing of wanting to pay my way to college. But what I realized is that if I paid the bill, I didn't have to answer to anybody. So I didn't have to answer to
Right.
mom, dad, grandma, nobody. And so as I look in hindsight, my motivation was really having that freedom of choice that if I fund it, no one has to tell me what to do. And so I didn't probably realize that till I was darn near 40. But that was probably to answer your question. The first time is when getting ready for college and realizing there was going to be a bill to pay and determining and figuring out how to make that happen.
Right. Yes. See that's a big deal. Um, I know that's always like a pressing point for a lot of people that go to school. A lot of people want to go to school, but they don't necessarily know how to pay
Mm,
for it. So I actually myself, I ended up, so I got some scholarships, but I actually ended up becoming an RA for about 3 years while I was at
mhm.
school, which helped out a whole lot. They tend to cover housing and things like that. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
I know. Mhm.
No, go
I know
ahead.
a lot of especially my parents. My dad kind of the same situation. He didn't really know he was disadvantaged until later on in his life,
Mhm.
honestly, where he's like out here in the real world. He's like, oh, you know, this is where things are. So, I appreciate you for answering that question. And so that leads me to another one. So you realized it and you accepted it. What were the first initial steps you took to change that for yourself?
Well, one, I started working when I was 16. And so that was the first start that, hey, I'm
Mm,
not going to have to ask for everything. I can fund it myself so I can pay for my gas and insurance and so forth. But again, it came down to paying for college that I really took the action. And so I was blessed to go. I was in a very nurturing school environment. So I tell everybody, I said I went to a Black preschool, nursery, elementary, middle, and high school. And
Okay.
so my high school, shout out to James B. Dudley High School, Panthers in Greensboro, North Carolina. We call ourselves sometimes the baby A&T. But it was an HBHS is what I call it.
Mm.
And what was beautiful about that high school is that even though we were probably 96% Black population,
Mhm.
we like within an environment of success. And so our freshman year in high school, I went to my first senior awards day. And so
Mhm.
they bring all the
Mhm.
students in, and you could see the seniors getting the full rise and getting the scholarships. And I remember Christine Greenlee, or Cynthia Greenlee being able to get scholarships and going to UNC and so forth. And I was like, I want to be like her when I grow up. And so that was like having that exposure as to what success was, put me on the path to say, okay, I'm gonna do the summer programs like I see these seniors doing. I'm gonna apply for scholarships. And this was back in the day when there wasn't an internet. And so,
Right.
got the scholarship applications, hung out in the guidance counselor's office, and really just started exploring what does this college thing mean, and even leveraging what I was good at. I was good at math and science. I didn't know what that meant. And I actually stumbled my way into engineering because I got tired of people asking me if I was going to be a teacher. And I'm like, no. And at the time, it was like, teachers don't make enough money. So, no, I'm going to do something else. And I was doing a
Right.
college tour, and someone said, well, you should try electrical engineering. It's a lot like math. That is not true. But that's what led me into engineering instead of mathematics. And that's it. It was all, like I said, it was a blessing. It was a happenstance. But what became clear was that I was going to have to figure out how to pay for it. And so I did that by probably applying for 60, 70 scholarships. And that was hand typed on the typewriter with the whiteout.
Oh wow.
And then once I got to college, I kept looking. Like I kept looking for scholarships once I got to school because I knew I had enough for probably the first 2 years, but I didn't know what was going to fill that gap. And was blessed enough to be able to get a sponsored scholarship after my freshman year because I got a 4.0. And yes, I don't know, it didn't happen after that, but I'm glad I got a good start. And I ended up getting a full ride. And so now
Awesome.
the
Wow.
extra scholarship money I had coming out of high school became something I could do something with, and I didn't know. I just knew my
Mm.
grandfather said, don't ever waste your money. If you're in a
Right.
grocery store and someone owes you a penny, go get your
Get the
penny.
penny.
And so I was in a situation where I had $13,000 as a
Mm.
19-year-old, and the rest of school was paid for. And I was like, okay, Keisha, don't waste it, but what do you do? And that led into my start of my path into investing.
Wow. Okay. So that's profound. So you ended up getting a full ride after your freshman year, getting a 4.0.
Hmm.
So from that point on, you didn't have to worry about any bills at school at all.
No,
That was
no, I mean,
it.
well, except for the fact that engineering ain't a 4-year program. And
Mm.
so I
Okay.
did, but one of the things I knew, I had friends and others who took 4.5, 5 years. And so I said, well, while I have this full ride, I know I'm probably going to still have another year to pay for. And so
Right.
I always kept that sort of at the side, knowing that I would have to probably lean on that. But the other thing I did is I went to the people that offered me the scholarship and said, hey, can y'all pay for another year? And they said yes. So I'm like,
Oh
bam.
wow.
So
Okay.
the story of that is to always ask. And if you don't ask, the answer is no. And so
Right.
again, it was a blessing. But the point of it is I kept looking. So even after I had that full ride, I applied for more scholarships, and I got a NSBE scholarship that bought my first laptop. So those are things that I didn't just sit by and say, oh, okay, I'm cool. Kept going with it to see what else. And then again, started this investment thing, and I didn't know. I started with the CD, and I'm like, that interest math don't make sense. And so then I started reading, and I met a financial advisor, and I'd call him, and then I'd read, and I'd call him, and then I'd read. And eventually he started me a portfolio, and that just got me comfortable with how to buy
Right.
stocks.
Right.
And that was really a fundamental part of my financial journey.
So I think that's big on what I've actually been talking about on my page is how foundational investing is. I think one of the biggest things that we miss as a people in general is just the power of investing.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time we get money, the first thing we can think of is how can I spend this? And I'm guilty of it. In a similar situation, I received some money. I think I got $5,000. My one of the first scholarships that I got
Mm-hmm.
from the city of Madison. Shout out Bob Jones. And I think I got that May, by like August, gone. But now that I'm working and everything, I can see that building your investment portfolio is really the basis of building your wealth. And so I guess to segue into another question, you got that $13,000 and you're like, this is what I'm going to do with it. How long did it actually take you to build good skills and see progress? I noticed that finances is not like an overnight thing. It's definitely a situation where you have to be consistent, keep learning, and stay proactive in everything that you're doing.
Yeah. So what got me started is once I had that small portfolio and I would get my statements and I would read it, I would be like, oh, it was $45 to buy that stock. And then I started reading and researching more. The internet came out, so I had AOL to go look at things. And I remember reading Buy What You Know. And
Uh,
I remember reading about dividend reinvestment programs or DRIPs. And
uh,
so I said, well, I could pay this $35 in this brokerage account to buy a share of Coca-Cola, or I could go directly to Coca-Cola and buy a share of stock. And so I did that.
hmm,
So I ended up buying Coca-Cola and Johnson. And I said, well, I'm gonna do this every month because I was working during school. I had, I kept working. It wasn't like I got the scholarship and I'm just chilling. I kept working. I worked summer internships. Um, and so I started investing $40 a month in Coca-Cola and $50 a month at in Johnson. And it was like a bill. It was my pager
right,
bill, my insurance, and these two stocks. And it became a norm. And so then I went and had an internship at Procter and Gamble. And they had a piece of paper that said employee stock purchase at a discount. My mama taught me about sales and discounts. So I raised my hand and I said, I want to do the employee stock purchase
hmm,
program. So that was my third stock. And so the foundation became that I got into it. And it wasn't a lot of money. So again, I had this $13,000. I had an extra scholarship to pay for. I traveled and did other things while in school. I bought stuff.
right.
But when I finished college, I had a portfolio and I didn't have debt. Like that was the biggest thing is I
That's
didn't have
big.
debt. And so I continued that process in when I got to my real job. And I was like, well, now I got to pay all the bills and I'm in an apartment, I'm by myself. And so it wasn't as much loose money left, but I
Right,
got into the 401k. I kept the Johnson, the Coca-Cola, the Procter and Gamble. I kept buying it. And I was buying fractional shares. Like Coca-Cola, I
right.
think at the time was $60. So I was buying fractional shares. But what it did is it created a rhythm and a pattern and a practice that just became my normal. I didn't have to figure it out. It just became my normal. And what I realized again in hindsight is that my perspective was I'm paying myself first. I
Mhm.
didn't have a retirement calculator. I didn't know what this was or any of that. But I did know that the math of a savings account and the math of a credit card wasn't working for me. And so once I got a taste to investing and I saw that, oh, this stock went up $3, or this stock is paying me $3 a share every year just for owning it, that math made
All right.
sense. And so I just kept doing things that made sense. I didn't know, I didn't have it figured out, I didn't have some roadmap. I just did what made sense.
Mm. I think that's a big thing. Sometimes you might not necessarily know how beneficial something is, but you know you're on the right track as far as what you're doing. That's awesome. While you were speaking, it made me think of how important it is to realize that although you may be on a journey to liberate yourself financially, you also have to live life.
Mm.
So can you talk a little bit to how you manage to invest, but you also manage to still enjoy yourself and travel and how important that is.
Absolutely. So, and this is like it's still a full circle moment because um I'm retired now, and so it's that mind of what we got to work with. And my husband's still working, but it's like, what are we working for? I don't tap too much in this portfolio, but also life is precious and it's short. You know, I've lost classmates, I've lost coworkers, and so it's become even more of a factor now about living life. So what I would say is that my our approach was always to pay our future selves first. But it wasn't this fire movement, it wasn't some sacrifice thing. It was, okay, I'm gonna get the company match, I'm gonna do more each month, and then we'll see how it goes. But it wasn't like I gotta do this and I gotta max out that. It wasn't that, it was continue contributing. And other things that we just made some decisions on is we never, and this is one of my wealth tips, we never really got to the point that we were trying to keep up with the Joneses. Did we want to live in a nice house? Yes. Did we want to live in a nice neighborhood? Yes. Did we have to drive new cars? No. I mean, I kept my car from college until I had my second kid. And so those were the things that we did. We didn't buy new cars every few years. Now, in hindsight, I bought two cars in the last 3 weeks, but that's a whole nother subject. But for years, you know, we would drive our cars 10, 12 years. And so that was one of the ways that I didn't have that. Once that car payment was gone, that extra money went into the portfolio. So that was another thing. So to answer your question, I got an affinity for traveling very young. I love traveling. Nesby gave me the opportunity to go a lot of places. I would have never gone to Kansas City if it wasn't for Nesby. I would have never gone to Ghana if it wasn't for Nesby. And so it
Really?
got me into a space of seeing what was more in the world. And
Right.
that's a bug that I still have. And so I remember we got married in Jamaica because it just didn't feel like it made sense to pay all this money for somebody to come have some chicken wings. So we got married in Jamaica. We paid for our parents to come. And
Wow.
then that became something that was like, okay, we like this island. And so we go almost every year. And I remember my first time my kid went, we took his passport picture in his car seat. So my youngest was 8 months old and my oldest was 3, and we went to Jamaica, and we did that every year. I think we are on year 16, and that's something we do, and it's not just us. We take friends, so there might be 12 or 20 of us in Jamaica
Wow.
in a house getting cooked for, getting served, and doing a whole lot of nothing. Like it
Mm-hmm.
ain't all this excursion, horseback riding stuff. We just
Just
go
chilling.
to chill, to fellowship, to eat and drink. And so that was thing. And then I have friends who have had international assignments and have gone places, and we're like, well, let's go to Bali. And this is before Instagram and all that,
Right.
right? And so we have made it a point to expose our kids to things that are that would broaden their perspective. And one of the ways we've done that is we don't do Christmas gifts. We hadn't
Mhm.
done Christmas gifts since my kids were probably 4 because they didn't care about them. They had phones and iPads and so forth, and I'm like, so we're not going to buy stuff, we're going to go somewhere. So we go to San Diego, or we go to Texas, and as we've moved in different places of the country, for Christmas we went somewhere and we shared that experience. And so that's how we were able to still live life while still fueling the portfolio. And it came in seasons. When I had 2 kids in daycare, I wasn't investing a whole lot of nothing. The daycare is expensive. Any of y'all young folks, go ahead and live like you got a kid in daycare now. Trust me, it will humble you. Put it in your portfolio. Um, but that was the
Yes.
other thing that I've learned is that there are cycles to it. So there are sometimes we're all in the market, and there are sometimes where it's like we just bought a house and we got to buy some furniture, and so instead of investing X amount this year, it might be less, but we're still going to get that company match. So that's been sort of the cycle, is that one, paid myself first,
Hmm.
paid myself first, paid my old lady self first, and
Right.
then everything else fell into play. So it kept us, with some boundaries. We didn't just hop on a plane all the time, but we knew what we were doing and what our budget was for it.
So, okay, you mentioned the key word, budget. Um, how long would you say it took you to build skills in terms of budgeting? A lot of times we make plans. I I think, shout out to Nesby after being Nesby president for a couple of years. That paper plan don't mean anything. It's actually, committing to that budget and doing it that allows for you to enjoy the fruits of what you worked for. So what are some of the tips you have on actually following your budget, being able to say, no, I'm not going to do this right now. I'm going to wait.
So it's a strategy that we had.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things for me is I never saw what I didn't have to work with. So I had a direct deposit into the investment account. So one 401k automatically came out, can't touch that. And then any other investing, I had an investment checking account or investment savings account. And my direct deposit for whatever amount we were going to invest went into that account. And so all the brokerage accounts or whatever pulled from that account and I never looked at it. So for me, I hate budgeting. And I'm a financial person. I hate to say, but I hate budgeting. But in my head, I knew what we were working with. And this is a strategy my husband and I had. He did all the little bills and I did the big bills. So I had the mortgage, he had the light bill, cable, and all of that. And so for me, it was easy because I knew these two things or these three things were coming out of my check. These right here are the things we do every day. I already knew the investment was out there, so I didn't have to make a choice each month. Am I gonna invest $1,000? My check that came in paid the bills and was play money. So I knew what was in my checking account. I didn't have to think about it. So there was a structure we put in place where we would go through and say, okay, 401k is done. This is how much we're investing this month. This is how much we're saving. And that investing and saving didn't require a decision every month or every 2 weeks. It was already there. And so that was my particular budgeting strategy. And the other thing is the credit card was paid off every month, period. No balance ever. It the time I forgot to make a payment and I had to pay a saw interest, one, I didn't pay it, I called them. But haven't paid interest on a credit card in 30 years. Never.
Wow.
But I'm gonna leverage it for cash flow, I'm gonna leverage it for points. And so that was the other thing is if I couldn't pay my credit card bill, we were spending too much. What are we going to cut back on? And so that was the way that we did it and it kept it simple. So in my head, and again, I wanted to be a math major, right? In my head, I already knew what the numbers were that we had to work with. I knew what the car payment was. I knew what the mortgage was. I knew what the insurance was, whatever those big bills were. And I knew what was cash flowing. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, this is the plan. And so that was the way that I do budgeting. I hate writing out the budget, but sometimes I'll go and say, okay, what's this cash flow looking like? Oh, that's why it feels tight because we got
Right.
this new kid on the insurance and it went up $500. So
Woo.
there's a point in time to go and look at the cash flow, but like a monthly budget and did I go over and under? And I'm not saying that's the right thing to do. That was just our approach. The key part is our future self was paid first, never had to make a decision if I'm going to invest this $1,000 or am I going on this trip. I never saw $1,000. And that was actually very similar in a lot of other things. So when it came to bonuses, when it came to raises, that my check stayed the same. So if I got a 5% raise or whatever, that amount that went to that investment or savings account, that's where it went. I never saw it. And look, it's like $200 a month anyway. Like you're not going to see a big chunk when you get a raise. But whatever that amount was, I didn't see it. It automatically went to those other accounts. And so we kept our lifestyle in check. And that was another huge contributing factor to us building our wealth portfolio.
Right. So great point. One thing along my journey is as I budget and everything is, when you do get more money, maintaining what your allocations as far as like your investing, but not overspending. Like you said, you got raises and you didn't see it. Can you talk about how that set shift, I guess, was for you? Did you ever struggle with not, spending more of the money that you had? No?
No, because I always knew, and I didn't realize I always knew until a friend asked me. I always knew I wasn't going to retire at 65. I always knew it was going to be earlier. And I didn't realize how soon I knew that until it was 2000. I was talking to a college friend that we hadn't talked in a while. And she said, "Are you still retiring at 55?" I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "You said when we were in college, you were going to retire at 55. Are you still doing that?" And I'm like, "Actually, it's 53, but I have no recollection of saying that." She said, "You absolutely did, which is why it's on my vision board." And
Okay.
so for me, I knew, I read the stuff that the 401k and so forth, that you can't touch it to 59 and a half without a penalty. And I don't pay penalties. I don't
Mm,
pay interest. I don't pay penalties. I don't do that. I don't give money away, right? And so I knew fundamentally that there was going to be a gap to fill. So if I was going to retire at 55 and you can't touch your retirement to 59 and a half, I was going to have something to pull from for
right.
those other 5 years. And so that's where the outside investing came into play, was that I always knew I wasn't doing this like everybody else.
Okay. And so, how important is are those long-term goals? I think another thing that I realized in for myself is no goals kind of means that you don't know where you're going. So, like you said, you already kind of knew, hey, I'm about to do this by 53. And so you started working on other ways to make sure you're getting paid. How how important would you say having those goals are for somebody just recognizing where they are and trying to do better?
I think it's important to have the goal, but more than that, it's important to be committed to the goal. So
Mm,
it's one thing to say, I have a goal of XYZ, and then you're doing things that don't align with that. Like, okay, you have a goal of not working full time, but working part time within the next 2 years, but your spending is the same. That's not a commitment to it. And I'm not judging you. It's just math. Like, the one thing I can say about being an engineer and married to an engineer, a lot of it is just math, right? And so the goals are important to be conscious of what I want to do.
hmm
So I was conscious that I ain't doing this like my parents did. I was conscious that I I have, so here's the other thing that came into play, and I'm going on a tangent, but it's worth it. I've always had a big mouth.
hmm
Kindergarten, first grade, college, career. And so I got into a situation where my big mouth almost got me fired. And I had two babies and a mortgage.
Ooh.
And I remember saying, and this was in 2008, I remember specifically. And I remember saying, "Oh crap, I gotta shut up because I can't lose this job. Like, I can't lose this job." And I remember saying that I will never ever be in a financial situation that I have to stay in a place that's no longer serving me. In hindsight, I needed to go through that in that situation, but it felt funky. I was mad every day. I
Yeah.
wasn't working with joy, even though my boss said, "I remember you working with so much joy." I'm like, "What?" She told me this like 6 months ago. I was like, there was nothing joyous about that season. But what it did is it set the goal for me to be able to always have enough that if I needed to walk away, I
You
could.
could.
And I
Mm,
didn't know that goal at 22. I didn't know that goal at 30. I just knew that this situation felt funky. And what it did is it limited my choices. And if you want to piss Keisha off, you tell her something she got to do. I don't do
ooh,
that
yeah,
well.
I
And
feel
so when that limited my choice, it just ramped up the commitment to having enough to be able to walk away. And that led to having enough in the portfolio for retirement. That led to leave and go to another job that gave you a 40% raise. That led to, "No, I'm not doing this
you.
anymore." "What do you
Mm,
mean?" "Like, I'm just not." "Well, what are you going to do?" "I'll figure it out." And this was like the first time I resigned the job. And I was like, "No, I'm good." "Well, don't you want my job?" "Nope." you
I'm
know?
very good.
And I remember walking away. And it was like, at the time I was young. So it was probably ego, but it was empowerment. And they were like, "Well," I remember the specific words my boss said, "Jill's not going to let you leave." And I said, "Let is a very strong word,
Yeah,
and I'm grown.
that's a
And I
wild
said, but
statement.
tell me what it sounds like. And what it was it ended up being a position that they created just for me, that allowed me to do a non-traditional role and allowed me to see and be a part and touch a whole lot of a big company. And it was sort of on my terms. And that was the first time that I realized that wealth is more than your portfolio, because at that time my wealth was my expertise, and my
Mm,
wealth was being able to develop relationships. And so I took my career, and they went and they plugged me, go to California, or go to Kansas, or go to Richmond, or go to Pensacola, or go to Dallas. And I'm like, I started to realize nobody else in this company can just go somewhere,
doing this.
plug in, make a relationship, and facilitate change in 2 weeks. And I'm like, that's me. Like, that skill set is me. And that was the first time that I was like, I can do some stuff. And I also realized that relationship building, that quote unquote soft skill, I'm like, that was one of my superpowers. I could build trust quickly. I knew my stuff. And that allowed me to have a season in my career that gave me so
Mm,
much broad perspective, gave me so much more exposure to the company. And even now, I was just talking about one of my old bosses yesterday with one of his coworkers who happens to work with him now. And I was like, I still have those relationships. And so even though
mhm.
I've left that organization, the relationships, the ability to plug in if I chose to, is still there. And
Still
so
there.
when we're talking about wealth, get clear that it's not just the money. Your wealth is your expertise. Your wealth is your relationships. Your wealth is your perspective, being able to offer a perspective when we're told we're not qualified, being able to offer a perspective of, I got to go a couple levels deep on my knowledge, because what I say is not going to be taken immediately at face value. There's some prove it in there. And then once I build my reputation, there's no more proving. I just know. And y'all can work around the bend if you want to, but you'll come back to me. And I realize that I'm like, oh, they'll just come back. Don't fight them. They'll
Right.
come back.
Mm. You know that is a powerful, I think, realization to have, to recognize the value, that you bring somewhere. And so that actually leads me to one of the cornerstone questions I have, is how does career play into finances and goals? You went from scholarship to working to saying, okay, now you are the CEO of your own LLC, right? And you've put in the work to get there, right? So yeah, how did that play into what you do now?
So, that's a loaded question. And so I'll try to say this in a way that's not too all over the place.
Mhm.
But when coming out of college as first generation college graduate, and having the opportunity to go into a corporate setting that I didn't know a whole lot about. And this actually probably started before, it definitely started before college graduation. This started my freshman year in college. By October, of my freshman year in college, I had an internship offer. That ain't normal, but I'm blessed. I take it. I passed that
That's
P&G
incredible.
test. And so when I went into Procter and Gamble in June of 1996, I had this project. I was a freshman, so it wasn't one of those big engineering projects. It was one of them small ones that you ain't gonna break nothing. But what happened was there was a group of Black engineers who took it upon themselves to wrap their arms around us, to be able to learn the unspoken rules, to be able to practice, to be able to present, to be able to see and observe things in a corporate setting. And I bring that up because I leaned and leveraged on that to this day. And I lean on my presentation skills. I lean on I heard what you said, but your body said something different. Like, I lean on that I learned at 19. So I finished school. I go into a corporate setting. It was a structured program with General Electric. General Electric gave me my scholarship in college, and so
Okay.
I almost didn't go work for them. And my mentor was like, "No, we're gonna get you a job." And they offered me a job in Atlanta. I'd always wanted to go to Atlanta,
Wow.
and it worked out. And so I started my career by just learning how to apply my analytical skills to business. And so I did that in the energy industry, and then I was like, this ain't fun. I don't like being at these power plants. I don't really care about these gas turbines. Like, and I had some friends go into healthcare, and I had some family go through some health issues. And I'm like, how do I get into healthcare? And I just so happened to find that healthcare needs problem solvers too, a lot of them. And so I was able to take my analytical and quality skills into healthcare. And I remember at the time, people were like, oh, you hadn't been in healthcare long. You don't know this and that. And you're not a nurse. I'm like, okay, but numbers are numbers, data is data. And in that respect, I just did what I was good at. And then I had a chief nursing officer like, Keisha, you think different. I'm like, yeah, I think there are some things I want you to work on. Okay. And she gave me the opportunity to leverage my problem solving skills in a non-traditional way. And in that, I created my own job. I wrote up the job description, and then they were like, "Oh, we need two more Keishas." I didn't have the 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 maturity at the time on how to say this to say there are no more Keishas, but you can try to get someone else with this title, right? But I took that and just kept leveraging the problem solving skills, and that worked until it didn't anymore. And it was like, well, there's not a whole lot of growth here. This isn't very fun anymore. And I'm like, and you know what? I learned from GE that I need to know the finance of business. And I don't know anything about the finance of this hospital. So by accident or blessing, I found a position that gave me access to finances in a hospital. And it caused us to move from Charlotte to Austin, and I learned so much, and I was so open, and I was so curious, and I learned about every part of the hospital. And I also learned that I got typecasted per se. Like, oh, you're a labor person. You know how to manage expenses in the hospital, but you don't know operations. I'm like, actually, I do, because I can tell you how every department works. I can tell you how every department gets credit for the work that they do, whether that's the lab or the cath lab or x-ray or surgery. Like, I can tell you all of that. And so that then parlayed into okay, so you're not going to give me the path to an executive position, so I'll go do something else. And that's where that situation came up of Jill's not going to let you quit. um, and so I built on that. And so I say all that to say that from a career standpoint, it was the fuel for my portfolio. When I first started working, I also thought it was the fuel for who I am, the fuel for my identity, and these titles meant something. And it got to a point that it's like, no, like it's great to be recognized, it's great to promote, but at the end of the day, this salary is fueling my future. So I'm gonna get my 401k, I'm gonna get my bonus. And so from a career standpoint, I did work towards getting an increase in salary. Like, I'm not gonna stay somewhere the same salary and get these 1 or 2% bonuses. Now, I'm not a job hopper, but I had a balance of getting career advancement, but specifically skill advancement. When it got to the point that my skills weren't advancing anymore, I get a little antsy, and it's like, okay, it's time for something else. And I realized for me, that's about a 3-year mark. Um, and so, from a career standpoint, I realized in hindsight, didn't know it then, that picking up the skill set, picking up the what you're I call it what you're badass at, and figuring out where to apply that is the key to the career and relationships. I had someone the first time I realized I had a sponsor. The person you don't know that's talking about you in the room. When I was looking to get a role, and I had a different person whisper to me and said, "Hey, such and such was told not to mess this up because they want you in that job." I'm like, well, what does that mean? That means ask for what you want. Keisha already a little bold. You're telling her she can ask her own salary? They were like, yes. I said, oh, that's how that happens. And I did. And they said yes the next day, meaning I didn't ask for enough. But
Wow.
that was like
Hello.
a
Yeah.
40% jump. But I also knew I was being underpaid. And
Mm,
so I was like, okay, that's how that works. And so I said, but that jump, not going to see it. It's going in the portfolio. And so I say where career comes into place is two things. So one, it was probably three. It fuels your expertise. Leverage these organizations to learn something. You're not just there to collect a check. You're there to learn something, to build relationships, and sort of see what the industry is happening. So leverage to build what you're badass at. The second piece is don't let these big money, because y'all come out of college, these young folks now making more than I did 20 years of my career. I ain't hating on you, but I'm recognizing it, right? And so it's like, don't get caught up in being a six-figure person or a sub six-figure person. Like, don't build the lifestyle for that, but leverage it. And if that means that you can go get 30% somewhere else, it's fine. But this is the second part. Make sure your career is fueling you from both a skill set development standpoint, that it's somewhere you want to live, like living in Podunk, Iowa, just have that as a small, like maybe 2 year stint, but um, be clear that your career is also aligned with your lifestyle. If you're working 80 hours, you ain't got time for family, your friends ain't seen you in so long because of this job, then that's also not balanced. So the career is for a period of time, it's a source for skill set building. It's a source for income, building a portfolio, getting that 401k match, but your career also is something that you can leverage and get to the point that, particularly when you get to, you're at 40 something, that's when it gets a little funky, like, do I still want to do this? And it's about being reflective of how you want to share your gifts with the world. So career has changes as you go through your path. You're learning, you're new in the beginning, you're leveraging and getting paid for what you're worth towards the middle. And at the end, it's like, what do I really want to be doing?
mm,
And what I found for me was that the titles meant less and less as my
as
kids
you
got
go, right?
older
Mm,
and so forth. And so that's where career fits in. I tried not to go on a tangent. I probably did, but those are the three ways that I think career comes into play when it comes to wealth. It's a source until it's not. And when
mm,
you have the skill set and the relationships and you've been real clear and determined on how you want to live your life, that's when you're in a situation like me where you're an entrepreneur and say, where do I want to gift my talents and skills? Because I have the financial portfolio to give me some flexibility with that.
yeah.
That's a wonderful life to live. I promise you.
Yeah, I don't mind. We don't mind you doing this tangent because that's what we're here for. But you hit on some extremely key things, especially on the last part there. The kind of theme I'm getting is using your career and good financial habits to sponsor your dreams, to sponsor what it is that you really want to do. Which leads me to one more question before we go into our where you give your WealthWise tips, and I'll explain what that is in a minute, y'all.
Okay.
Um, is how did you get into your LLC? So you realized, you said after about 3 years, it's like I'm not really growing anymore. You already named that price of what you want to be paid, and you did what you wanted, and now it's like I'm ready to do something different. All right.
It wasn't that clean.
No.
So, no, it wasn't that clean. So, what led me into my LLC, the first thing was recognizing probably 4 years before I left corporate that there was an opportunity for me to do something as a project. And I
Mm,
was like, well, let me propose this. It might be a little funky because I'm in the company. And it didn't work out, but it got my brain thinking of, I'm one of the few people in the company that can do this work. Can I do it independently? And it didn't work out, but it was the first inkling of it. And then I got into a situation where my job was literally killing me. Look, I could feel, like, the curve or the bell curve of life expectancy. I felt it coming this way. you know? And it was one of the first times in an organization I spent almost 13 years with where I didn't feel valued, I didn't feel supported,
Mhm.
and quite honestly, I felt abused, right? And at that point, it wasn't this, well, I got this entrepreneurial thing, I'm going to leave. It was, this isn't serving me anymore. I don't know what this means. This is scary as F, I promise you. And I said, but what I do know is I need a break. I can't keep doing this. And so through that break and through conversations with a lot of mentors and a lot of folks who were like, well, maybe you can do this, or maybe you can move here. And I was like, I'm not willing to do that anymore. So getting to the point in my life of saying what I'm not willing to do, that was my flip. And so what helped with that flip is I looked at the portfolio and I said, we're not going to be hungry or homeless. We're good. And my husband supported me in that. And mind you, when it talks about income, I was bringing in a bit more than him, but he was like, we'll be fine. And having that partnership and that support and having 20 some years, almost 30 years of building a portfolio and seeing how it grows gave me the confidence to say I am no longer willing to be in a career or work environment that's not serving me. And if anything, it's detrimental to my health. And I said it's not worth it. And so this wasn't this pretty, I'm gonna leave, I gotta map out when I'm gonna go to this entrepreneurial thing. Nah, it came out of a real funky situation that I had to choose me.
Mhm.
And I'm blessed with the time that I had with that organization. And I would actually engage with that organization again, but not like I was before, not under the terms and the environment that, like I said, just was not healthy. And I knew better. That's the thing, is I had spent so much time in this company. I knew how things worked and I knew this was odd. I'm like, this ain't the way this is supposed to be. And I'm just no longer willing to do it. I'm no longer willing to move because the commitment to the asshole is better than the commitment to me. And so that's how my transition happened. And what I realized is that I want to empower more people to be able to make that step like me, to take a pause. There are so many of us who work 20, 30 years in these good jobs, and there are good years and there are bad years. But one of the rare things that many of us get to do is take a break. And
Right.
taking a break and being able to step back and reconnect to who 19-year-old Keisha was, that ambitious, that strong, that too much mouth person, connecting back to her and realizing there's nothing wrong with you, and being able to say, and what I really want to do is I want to help people in good jobs be able to be financially solvent. I want them to know what moves they have. And I'm not telling everybody to quit their job and become an entrepreneur. I'm just saying be clear on where your career and your income comes into play, leverage it, but when it's no longer serving you, be in a position financially that you're able to shift. That's my goal in life, is to help people do that. Young people, y'all have the beauty of being able to start this compound interest early. Old folk like me, it's still not too late. And those are the conversations I want to be in.
That I think that's absolutely awesome. I think a lot of times, I know from my personal familial experience, oftentimes that's how entrepreneurship goes. It's not
Hmm.
always a smooth transition or planned out process, but it's, hey, I'm tired of this. I want a different way. I got to do what I got to do. And thankfully, the time that you spent building your portfolio allowed you to make that type of decision.
Hmm.
Um, and that's personally what I want to be able to do, is to put myself in a situation where I can make that decision, instead of having to just continue doing something where I, like you said, feel undervalued or being abused, being mistreated, things like that. So thank you for sharing that and
Yeah.
explaining that. I think that ties in incredibly well into being able to recognize where you're disadvantaged, adapting your situation for you, right? What what you want to do for your family, your goals. There's nobody else involved in that but you, and then later on your husband. I think that's awesome. Um, and before we wrap up, we're going to end with a special segment, and I'm gonna get some comments after the segment called WealthWise Tips. So these are 5 key tips that all our guests are going to give. It's just some takeaways to help you either with your mindset, and just to really do better. So, if you'd like to go ahead and give your WealthWise tips, we would greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I've mentioned a number of them, so I won't go too much into detail. But first one, pay attention to your money. While I'm not a fan of budgeting, you got to know what's coming in and what's going out. And again, I'm a math person. So if what's going out is more than what's coming in, if you're living paycheck to Monday and not paycheck to paycheck, then you got to shift. So know where your money is going. Like, don't be out here blind swiping, tapping, know where your money is going and
Yeah.
adjust accordingly. The second one, and I've said this before, get your benefits. So get your bonus, get your things, get your 401k match. Make sure you have it invested. I'm not going to tell you where to invest it, but get your 401k participation. Aim for maxing it out. If you can't max it out, at least get the match. Know when your 401k is vested. I don't want nobody out here leaving jobs at 4 years and 11 months, and you get vested at 5 years. Know when your 401k gets vested. Don't leave the money on the table. Stay another month. you know, don't move on up. So I'm old. I grew up with the Jeffersons. They moving on up. Don't move on up. Stay within your means. Just because you can afford to have $1 million house don't mean you need $1 million house. Just because you can
Right.
afford to buy a luxury car don't mean. I drove a Honda for years. I got a luxury car now. Just bought a convertible because we live at the beach. I ain't never think that was going to be possible. But for years, we drove 15-year cars, right? My husband had a car one time in Vegas that didn't have air conditioning working in Vegas. I didn't even know it. I'm like, what you sweating for? He said, my air don't work. I said, let's get you a new car,
Right.
okay? But live below your means. Live below your means. Don't move on up. Take action to build for your future self now. Don't wait till I got it all figured out, or I'm going to wait till I get to this salary amount and then I'll start saving. One of the key factors in my path was that I started practicing early. $90 a month wasn't going to make me a millionaire, but that practice did. And the fifth one is open a brokerage and Roth IRA accounts. So if you want to retire early and you want to have some tax strategy, open a brokerage account. That gives you the gap between when you early retire and when you can access your retirement account. And a Roth IRA gives you tax strategy in retirement. Those are the two accounts I want you to go open. I don't care if it's, I don't know where the balloon's coming from, but I don't care if it's Fidelity, Schwab with your bank account. I don't care. But open a brokerage account, put $100 a month in it. Just start and open your Roth IRA. If you haven't done your taxes yet for 2024, you can still contribute to your 2024 Roth IRA. There's a $7,000 a year limit. And I say anything the government puts a limit on is probably good for you. And a Roth IRA is one of those. Those are my 5 tips.
Thank you so much. Those are great tips. I definitely will be following those. Hopefully, the viewers will as well. And I just want to thank you for getting on. I think this was very insightful. I definitely learned a lot. Hopefully, our audience learned a lot. I greatly appreciate it. To the audience, definitely make sure that you subscribe to YouTube and follow this Instagram channel. I'll be posting some clips from this interview from time to time just to keep things fresh. You'll see some quotes as well from some things Ms. Bickham has said, and we will also have a graphic for her WealthWise tips. And with that being said, thank you so much once again, Ms. Bickham, and see y'all later.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
Yes, ma'am. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.